Welcome to another presentation from the House of David Fellowship in Richmond, Virginia. I'm Lee Miller. Today we're going to pick up in our study of the book of Acts. We've made it to Acts chapter 21, but it's going slow. And here's the problem. I'm finding just too much stuff. Wasn't the plan, but that's where we are. So we've gone through Acts 21, and we are going to take a couple of minutes in this presentation to review part 1 and part 2. Today our focus is going to be on part 3, but you'll notice the slide says part 3.1. That's because what we have to talk about today is not going to get finished today. That's just the way it is. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. The presentation today is entitled Measure the Pattern. Probably a familiar phrase from the Tanakh, from the prophets actually. We'll get into it. What is on tap? Well, we're going to review part 1, which we did last year, believe it or not. Yes, last year. Part 1, we were in Acts 21, we were looking at the word of the day. We're going to review that. Then part 2, we're going to talk about Paul being observant and how some translators have a tendency to impose their theological beliefs on the text as they change it from Greek into English to make it say what they want it to say, and we're going to discuss that. We discussed that in part 2, so you have access to that, but we just need to hit it again just so that you're familiar. I've got one verse as an example. And then finally, we have the intro to part 3, the text in question. Now, here's something interesting. The question came out of this assembly. That doesn't mean the question doesn't exist elsewhere. But the question that I'm addressing beginning today came out of this assembly when somebody came to me and said, what about this and that? And I said, well, I'll address it. So here we are. Today we're going to begin addressing it. As I said, this is 3.1. So we'll talk about the text that's in question because this is the text that was referenced when the person asked the question. So, after we go through some of these things, what's the problem number 1 and what's the problem number 2? Now, of course, knowing how we process things, we have to start with number 2 first. Then after we do number 2, then we'll get started on number 1. So that's how it is. So this is what we're going to do today. We're in Acts 21, and you can be there if you want to. You can follow along as you see fit. All right, so let's get started. In part 1, the word of the day was a word that was translated as thousands in the text. And it was talking about, it was a discussion in which James was talking about the people who were believers in Yeshua. And he's talking to Paul, and there's a word that is used in the text, and it will show up, I'm pretty sure I left it in here somewhere, it'll show up when we get back to the text. But in this particular case, most of the translations will say that there are thousands that are zealous for the Torah and are believers. Thousands. But here's the problem. The Greek word is not the word for thousands. It's the word for tens of thousands, which at a minimum is 20,000. That's what the word means versus 2,000 or 3,000. So most of the English translations, as we looked at that time, had thousands, but based on other information which was in the presentation, if you remember, I went to archaeological discoveries and dealing with the number of people based on supply of things like water and food and farming area and people in square footage and that type of thing that was all done by archaeologists published in Bar Magazine. We went through all of that in part 1 so that you could see that thousands was specifically done so that the false narrative of the Jews rejecting the Messiah and his message could go forth. So we had to have a new religion because the Jews didn't want anything to do with it. And that is just not the case. So this was one of the places where they translated the word incorrectly, and we have called it out. So that's what we went through. So the conclusion for that was, what is the difference between 2,000 to 3,000 believers versus 40,000 out of 80,000? That's pretty significant. Pretty significant. And one of the things that takes place in the history of the first century, if you remember, Yeshua made a prophetic statement. He said that there would come a time when concerning the temple, not one stone will remain on another. And of course that happened. Well, a lot of the Jews were like, wow, he called that one, didn't he? He must be the Messiah. And so there was this massive leaving of what was happening in Judaism at the time to come over to this particular denomination called the Way. So that's what happened. All right, so anyway, that's the review of part 1 that we did last year. Part 2, we also did last year, and this is the testimony of Paul and the prophets, and once again, this takes place within Acts chapter 21, the way they deal with this. I have called it the mistranslation of 21:25 to imply that only the 4 things listed in Acts 15 were required. In other words, these 4 and no more. So you just got to avoid these 4 and you're good to go. That's not what the text says. But you can put words in like only into the English translation, which does not appear in the Greek text, and come away with, wow, they only had to do those 4. So in other words, James is telling Paul, man, I tell you what, we have tens of thousands that are zealous for the Torah and are believers, but I'm just reminding you that of the Gentiles who come in, there's only these 4 and no more. That's how it's translated, and that's not the case. Once again, it's adding a word that is not there, which changes it. So we covered all of that in part 2, and it goes back to Acts 15, which we did 5 years ago with James and the prophets, when we were breaking down that entire structure of what took place when they were studying the scriptures to find out what God was doing. So this is all in the past. I just wanted to cover it so that you could see it. Now, one of the other things that I did bring out in that presentation was the mischaracterization of Paul. He has been, I was reading this book, Pamela Eisenbaum. Her book is Paul Was Not a Christian. The Misunderstood Gospel, or something like that. I have it, I think I even have it on my Kindle, where she goes through and breaks down how over the centuries, Paul has become the fall guy. And all of the passages that talk about the Torah and Paul's relationship to it, they just go, oh no, that's not what he really meant there. So I'm going to give you one, just as an example. And there's quite a few, and of course, if we're in 21, we still got 7 chapters to go. And in those 7 chapters, Paul is on trial for most of it, and in there is incredible gems that we can harvest about what was actually happening with the denomination known as the Way. So we will get to that. I don't know what year we will get to that, but we will get to those. But anyway, I am going to just call up one now. The example that I'm going to use is from chapter 3 and verse 9. And here's what it says. There was a great uproar. And this is the court case. This is one of the court cases. There was a great uproar. And some of the teachers of the law. What does that mean? Who were Pharisees? Teachers of the law who were Pharisees. They stand up and argue vigorously. We find nothing wrong with this man named Paul. Now, here's the question. This is the quote that I put into my presentation. I find it doubtful that the teachers of the law, Pharisees, would say that about a man who had taught that following the teachings of Moses had been done away with. I struggle with that. Actually, I'm not buying. I'm not buying that. All right, so this was just one example. So, and we have looked at this a little bit. We'll look at it more as we get to the last 7 chapters of this book. My conclusion is, to find out how people understand things, look at how they live their life. You can talk all day, but your actions speak louder than your words. So I'm going to be watching, because what I see is the reality, and what you're, maybe it is, maybe it's not. It should be. You know, the thing about say what you mean, that would be nice. Doesn't always happen. So anyway, this is the end of my part 2 review. All right, so now we got the new material. Here we go. This is the text that we'll be looking at today, beginning at verse 20. This is the passage I was telling you about that I left in. You see, brother, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the law. Now, let me tell you why the word zealous here is important. I have highlighted it for a particular reason. There are a lot of Jews that are living in the diaspora. Not all of them are resident of Jerusalem. So they're out. And one of the problems that developed in the first century is that the Jews became a little bit slack on keeping the commandments. It was pretty convenient to just be slack because there was nobody there, calling you out for it. I mean, you had a rabbi in the synagogue. But basically, the history shows that the people who were outside of Jerusalem were more slack than the people who lived in Jerusalem. That's what the history has shown. So, here is James talking, and he is saying how many tens of thousands of Jews there are who have believed, and they are not slack concerning the instructions, but they are zealous for the instructions. That is a completely different paradigm than what we're told. All right? So there's verse 20. Let's continue. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor walk according to the customs. I don't even know where they got that from, but we'll just let that go for now. One day we might look at that. 22. What then? The assembly will certainly come together and meet. They're going to want to hear what you have to say. 23. Therefore, this is what I suggest. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. Take them and be purified with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads and that all may know that those things which they were informed concerning you are nothing, but you yourself walk orderly and keep the law. This is James' suggestion after discussion with the eldership in Jerusalem. This is the decision that they have come to. So this was pre-thought. They were ready to handle it, and this would take care of it. All right, let's continue with our text. 26. Then Paul took the men, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each of them. So we've got the 4 guys who are believers. We've got Paul who's a believer. And they're doing all this temple stuff. 27, our last verse. Now when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd. Now, that's really all that we need to discuss. There's more to the story, and it continues on. But these are the pieces that affect us. So, here are some things to consider. You've seen what has happened here. Things to consider. 1, disciples, which are running in the tens of thousands, were zealous for the Torah. I just defined what that means. That's a good thing. Next, a large number of priests joined this denomination of Judaism. They were doing their priesthood. This was in chapter 6 of Acts. And a large number of them joined the way. And guess what? There's nothing in the text that said they quit their job. All right. Next, law-keeping Pharisees, and we just read this, talking about Paul during his trial, stated they found nothing wrong with him. If he was not keeping aspects of the Torah, I can't imagine that they would have stood up and said, "Rah, rah, rah, Paul." Really? I'm not buying that. Just not buying it. Next, James does not even take a breath when he suggests this solution. He didn't blink. This was good to go. Not a problem to go into the temple and do these sacrifices and blah, blah, blah. And he's the head honcho right now. Next, those who ran the temple had no problem with Paul being purified. Isn't that interesting? And these other believers too. And the prophets, and we discussed this in Acts 15, like I said a few years ago, talking about the futures when Gentiles would attach themselves to the God of Israel, specifically lists sacrifices they will bring which will please the Most High. So we have got some stuff here that's going to have to be overcome. All right, so these are the things to consider. All right, so the question, what's the problem? Here's the problem. Since Yeshua entered into the most holy place as the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, securing access to God, there is no more need for the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificial system, which never got the job done anyway. That's been said to me. And here's the verse that's quoted. For the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed while the first tabernacle was still standing. That's the text that is quoted to support the statement of problem that I just read you. Don't worry, we're going to cover all of this. Just not today. We're going to build the foundation, and then we were going to address it. All right. What's the problem, part 2? In addition, Yeshua said that he came to fulfill the law. We know where that is, right? Matthew 5:17, which would include the sacrificial system. Just so you know, the sacrifices, the priesthood, and everything that relates to that is also in the Torah. As a matter of fact, it takes up 45%. And I remember when I came to this walk 20 years ago, I immediately took 45% of the Torah and set it aside. Because it was like, I have no idea what this stuff's talking about. Why are they adding cedar wood? What's the crimson for? Just as we saw today. So I decided that for me, the best thing for me to do was to set aside 45% of the commandments and take up the other 55. Well, okay. Now I'm back, I'm looking at the 45. So, anyway, okay. And I've heard it said, wouldn't it be akin to blasphemy if it was reinstated during the millennial kingdom? Because he came to fulfill it. So what are we doing? So, what does this mandate? A short review of the subject on fulfill. Like I said, we're not going to do number 1, we're going to start with number 2. And we're going to cover it and finish it today. Now, this particular subject was explored in more fullness in the presentation on April 1st, 2017, which I have already sent everyone here in the assembly the link to the presentation on YouTube. So you've probably already received that email. You can click on the link, and there is the 1 hour and 1 minute presentation on April the 1st. And if you start, I think I said around 25 minutes in is where I address more fully the Matthew 5:17 fulfill problem. So this is going to be a very short review of that. That was a year ago. All right, here's what the text says. There's the link, by the way. When you get this PDF, you will also, in addition to having this link in your email, you'll also be able to click on this PDF and it'll take you immediately to YouTube where the video will begin to play of the presentation that took place on April 1st last year. All right, here's the text that we're dealing with. Do not think that I have come to destroy the law of the prophets. I have not come to destroy, but to fulfill. I mean, how many of us have that memorized? I mean, really. This was the big one. So, here's what I'm going to say in our review here. There are 2 things to consider. First, do not think that I have come. We need to talk about that. And number 2, the word fulfill. So we got 2 things in this passage we're going to look at. Plenty more we could look at. I'm only going to look at 2 things because this is just a review. All right, so I'm going to start with Protestant Christian commentaries. You know my heart is there always with them. Okay, so here is one of the leading Protestant Christian commentaries that I use regularly. It is called the Word Biblical Commentary. This particular one's from volume 34A, and here it is. Do not think that I have come presupposes the existence of the opinion that is denied. I love this quote. This is called scholar speak. It's a foreign language, and I'm going to translate it into regular English. But I love this quote. I just love it. I read this quote, and a smile takes over my face. Do not think that I have come presupposes the existence of the opinion that is not denied. What the man is really saying is, Yeshua had done some stuff, and people were beginning to think that he was doing away with some of the restrictions in the Torah. So they were thinking, they had an opinion that he was thinking that. And he knew this. And so he said, do not think that I have come to do that, because I know that opinion exists, and I am denying it. So there you go. Do not think that I have come presupposes that these guys thinks he's changing it, and he's saying, nope, that's not the case. Let me continue with this commentary. Here it is fair to assume that Christ's sovereign interpretation of the law was so out of step with contemporary interpretation that it seemed to many that he was going against the law. This is the commentary's conclusion. All right? Let me tell you a story. It's called Written Torah and Oral Torah. And the story is going to be based with my man Peter in Acts 10:28a. And what does Peter say? He gets there, they go through the whole blah, blah, blah. His opening line is, you guys know it's against the law for me to be here, right? But you know, that's incorrect. That's not what the written Torah teaches. That's what the oral tradition teaches. And this was so big that Paul spent 5 verses addressing it in Ephesians, and here we are. Starts at 2:11, goes to 22, 14 and 15 are the big ones, which I am going to show you. He is commenting this after the fact. Look at this. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, by abolishing the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances. That's the KJV. Now, let me give you the NIV, just so you can get a different flavor. By setting aside the law with its commands and regulations. Slightly different. Slightly different. Let me tell you about the word abolish, just so we're clear. This is Freiberg, from the basic sense, caused to be idle or useless. The term always denotes a non-physical destruction, so we're not blowing up anything. A non-physical destruction by means of a superior force coming in to replace the force previously in effect. So there was something that was in effect that was guiding people's lives and decisions, and a new force came in and replaced the old force. And that was the doing away with that oral tradition that was part of the Torah. They were so combined in the first century that you thought the written and the traditions were all a single thing called the instructions of God. And Yeshua was chopping that down left and right, as we see from all the Gospels. Now let me tell you about this Greek word. You see ordinances up at the top there, commandments contained in ordinances. Now the NIV, they're talking about this is in the law. It's not in the law. You know what the Greek word is? The Greek word is dogma. And here's what it means. Things that are written by man. That's slightly different. If you go back and look at the Greek Old Testament and look at the word Torah in Hebrew, you will never find it referred to by the Greek word dogma, because it's never considered a writing of man. It's always considered God's instructions. So, I'm not going to sit here and beat on these people. I'm just telling you what exists. It was done away with. Here it is. More accurate, by abolishing that which separates. Remember it said, took two and made them one. By abolishing that which separates, that is the law of commandments contained in the oral tradition. So there's your problem with, I have not come to do less. I'm not doing away with the commandments. But see, here's the thing. It was an ellipses. I'm not doing away with the written commandments. So that's what we have to learn from that. But you're going to see that because we're going to now do the other half of that, which is our word fulfill. There's the Greek word there. And the English, I've translated the basic letters of the roots, P-L-E-R-R-O. All right, so this word is translated into English as fulfill, but it has 2 unique meanings. Now that's just crazy. But we have that. You could find some words in the dictionary in which it means this in this context, and it means this in this context, and those meanings are completely different. So we do it. But, for us, because we like to rely on the English translation most of the time, then sometimes we get tripped up. because we have to trust that the editorial committee that translated into English was honest through and through. And I hate to say it, but that just ain't the case. But anyway, okay, keep me off my soapbox. All right, here we go. Two different meanings that are unique. One, something that has been carried out. It has been performed. I'm going to show you an example so you can see this fit. And then number two, to clarify the true meaning of something. How different are those? That's pretty clear. Pretty clear. Two different meanings. Now, let me give you an example about 3 levels of ground. Imagine here, okay, here's my hand, there's 3 levels of ground. Over here, there's a hole. In the middle, it's even. And over here, there's a mound. Okay, so when you look at this, you can see that this is going to have to be brought up to make it even. This is going to have to be squashed down or removed to make it even so that all 3 are even. That's what that word means. That means you go in and things that are lacking, you bring them up to the level, and things that are too much, you bring them down by chopping it off. That's what the word is used for. All right? Clarify the true level of the ground is the way you can apply that. All right, so how do you know which one? There's only one way to know what that particular Greek word means in any given occurrence, which is dozens. There's only one way to know, and that's by the voice. We don't have voice in our verbs in English, but Greek has voice. All right, and there are 2 voices. So we're going to look at that. I'm going to show you in a minute. I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to show you where I find it so you can see it. But before we get there, I'm going to tell you where we are. If you look at people in this movement that we are in, if you talk to them, you read their documents, you watch their YouTube videos, you will find that they're all in agreement that this text, Yeshua is coming to make things clear. That's what they're saying. The opposition party, the entire Protestant Christian movement, the commentaries of all the major writers and professors in seminaries worldwide also agree that that's what it means. I know that's shocking. That is shocking. But just read their published materials. It's right there. I'm going to give you a couple. Of course, when I did this presentation last year, I gave you 7. Today, I think I'm giving you 2 or 3. 3 max. All right? When you look at the history of the first 5 centuries, that agrees with that meaning. So, Greek analysis, this is where we have to go. The story of how the opposition party arrived at their conclusion. This is a form of study in the scriptures that I'm going to demonstrate. There's many forms. This is the one that I used to study this. All right, the pitfall of the plain reading of the English text. This is where sometimes you have to go one level deeper. All right, let's go to Matthew 4:13. The text says, leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the seacoast in the borders of Zebulun and Nephthalim, something like that. 15 says that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying, verse 15, the land of Zebulun and the land of Nephthalim by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. That's the prophecy from Isaiah 9:2. And when this event took place, this was what was written. That it might be fulfilled. The Greek word is right here. Now, let's go to, I use BibleWorks. This is a program that I purchased to be able to do this because I could find this, this information, this single piece of information, I could find it probably in 60 seconds. But in BibleWorks, I can find it in less than 5. So by the time I do, what would turn out to be 30 hours of study, I can do it in 1 hour. So that's why I use this tool. But you can do this for free online. It just takes longer. All right, here we go. This is what my BibleWorks looks like. And I have pulled up this verse where fulfill is, and I'll blow this up as we go. There, I have the purple arrow pointing to the Greek word, and you'll notice that in this particular case, the voice is passive. I'll blow that up. The voice is passive. That's what this is, okay? So, Let's continue. Here's what Freiberg says about it. Of a set span of time, complete, reach an end, complete the task. So that's what took place there. There was a set of time that became complete because Yeshua went and did what the prophet said he would do, and Matthew is noting that by saying, he did this, this is what happened, this is according to what the prophet said. He fulfilled what the prophet said. And so here it is. Now, let's go to our passage, which is Matthew 5:17. Do not think I've come to abolish the law of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. If this Greek verb also is in the passive voice, then this translates to, I have not come to abolish them, but to allow them to reach the end of their set span of time. That means that once some event happens, they're done. It's over. If it's in the passive voice, back to Bible Works. This is my screen, Matthew 5:17. Zooming in, you can see it's the last word of Matthew 5:17. And here it is. You see it's active. I'll blow that up. It's the active voice. And see, the way this works in my Bible is once I pull up the Greek text, I put my mouse over it. In less than 1 second, it pops up and gives me all the information about that verb that I need instantly. That's how it works. All right, so let's keep on going with our analysis here. I've not come to abolish, but to fulfill. The Greek word, you'll notice the spelling is different. This one ends in S-A-I, the other one did not. Passive voice, of a set span of time. This was the passive definition, but it's not passive, it's active, which means give true meaning to. So the contemporary Christian scholars in their commentaries, which I said I did this in April 1st, so you can go back and look at that online in the YouTube link that I've sent you. This is what the scholars said in a summary. They said that this was the true meaning of the Torah. Yeshua came to give the true and deeper meaning of the Torah, the reestablishment of its absolute meaning, to clarify the true meaning of something, restore the original meaning of the law, bring it to its intended meaning. This is not Tim Hegg and Skip Moen and Rico Cortez. This is contemporary Christian scholarship of the last 150 years in their published works that are used in postgraduate seminary to teach Christian pastors. This is what they wrote. And I quoted it, every one of them, in the April 1st presentation. But I'm going to give you three. We'll start with the Anchor Bible. Much hangs on the meaning of the verb to fulfill. The verb can and frequently does convey the meaning of, to clarify the true meaning of something. Certainly, it can be argued that what Christ is doing in this legal material of Matthew 5-7 is trying to restore the original meaning of the law, where this seemed to be obscured by the accretions of commentary. In other words, there was so much oral tradition attached to these things that he needed to restore the original meaning that our Heavenly Father originally intended. And here is the Anchor Bible commentary stating this fact. 2. Word Biblical Commentary. This is the one that has my favorite quote that makes me smile. Whenever I'm feeling down, I just look up this quote. And I'm up. He continues, it is best to understand fulfill here as in the sense of bring to its intended meaning. This view is consistent with the expectation that the Messiah would not only preserve the Torah, the expectation of first century Israel, that the Messiah would not only preserve the Torah, but would also bring about its meaning in a definitive manner. And if you look at the April 1st presentation, I quote the Judaic literature that's not Rabbinic Judaism that states exactly how they expected the Messiah to do this. Quoted right in their writings. All right? Let's continue with 2. In other words, the law as interpreted by Christ will remain valid till the close of this age. Somebody help me here. What does this mean? This is Christian commentators writing. Oh, I could stop right here, but I'm not. I got one more. It's the best of the best. International Critical Commentary, ICC, written in the early 1900s, all free online. Downloaded one book at a time as a PDF. Here's what they say. The meaning of the words is clear. Really. Christ did not come to overthrow the authority of the Mosaic Law. This is a Christian writing this. Christ did not come to overthrow the authority of the Mosaic Law, which was to be eternally binding upon the hearts and consciences of men. So long as the world lasted, its authority was to be permanent. And we're going to talk about that when we get to verse 18 in just a moment. So hold on. Commentators have exhausted their ingenuity in attempts to explain away this passage, but its meaning is too clear to be misunderstood. Could a Christian professor say it any clearer? That the active voice of the Greek verb, that Yeshua came to make it clear what God required. There it is, in black and white. All right, let's keep on going. They figured this out because they looked at the voice. That's a lesson for us. Just keep it in mind. Now, 5:18. What did Yeshua say? Until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or tittle will pass from the law. So they were saying that this is going to last until this time. Yeshua is saying this. He says, I've come to make this clear. And not a single piece of the Torah, that includes the sacrifices, the priesthood, and blah, 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 that relates to that, none of that passes away until heaven and earth pass away. So let's look at when that is. We covered this 5 years ago. This is Revelation 21:1. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And in verse 22, you know what it says? I saw no temple. So it looks like to me the temple situation is done after heaven and earth passes away. Because in the revelation to John, there was no temple. Interesting. Looks like Yeshua was calling it just right. Implication from our analysis of fulfill, it looks like the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificial system will be with us through the end of the millennial kingdom, because that's when heaven and earth leave town. So now we're going to have to reconcile some stuff. So let's go back to what's the problem. Since Yeshua entered into the most holy place as the high priest after the order of Melchizedek, I'm repeating this, securing access to God, there is no more need for the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificial system, which never got the job done anyway. And the quote is from Hebrews 9:8, for the way into the most holy place had not yet been disclosed while the first tabernacle was still standing. Now, I'm going to give you other Christian commentators that talk about this passage so you can understand their thinking. Here we go. First one, Moses was taught the rituals by the Holy Spirit. All these parts of the Levitical ceremony displayed the impotency of its offerings and services to secure free access to God. There is clear implication in these words that when once the way into the true holy place, heaven, that's how he's defining it, had been opened by the divine high priest, the first sanctuary would no longer stand. Therefore, when the true sanctuary is opened up by Christ, we expect the first to fall, and its fall implies the end of everything in the ceremonial economy connected with it. In other words, now that Christ has accomplished what he accomplished, we're done with this, and we expect it to go away. All right? This is from a critical commentary of the Epistle to the Hebrews by Samson. By the way, you see I have their FP98, S192 in a different color. I'm going to start doing this because my postgraduate seminary library in downtown Richmond that I have been using for the last 20 years, has now had a change in policy, and anybody can go in and use their resources. You can't check out material. You have to contact me and I'll check it out for you. But everybody can go in and use all of their resources, all of their journal stuff, which has been digitized, so you can save that and send it to yourself as an email, put it on a flash drive, access to all the books, all the archaeology stuff. It's all there, and you can go in and use it. You just can't check out a book. And so from now on, when I think about it, I am going to put where the books are so that you, if you wanted to go check something, you could just go straight there and get the book, sit down and read it, take pictures of it with your phone, whatever you want to do. All right, let's go to number 2. I'm doing 3. In the record of the tabernacle arrangements and the Levitical offerings, the Holy Spirit has a lesson to teach, as in the other parts of the Hebrew Scripture. What does he teach about the Day of Atonement? This, that throughout the age of the Old Covenant, there was no direct access to God. So basically, Enoch had no access to God. Moses had no access to God. David had no access to God. And the list is long. This is from the Epistle of the Hebrews by F.F. Bruce, a brilliant theologian. But he has some theological issues, I feel. All right, finally, what the Spirit reveals is the lack of access to the true presence of God. Under the Old Covenant, there has not been a decisive revelation of the means of approach to God. And then he quotes the way into the sanctuary, which is in the text. This is from the Epistle to the Hebrews, a commentary on the Epistle to the Hebrews. There's the text. So you could look this up. So, let's go back to Samson and get started on our examination as we close this first presentation. He says, once the way into the true holy place, heaven, true sanctuary, okay, here they are. So where is he getting this from? Well, let's go take a look. In Exodus 25:8, let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Does that ring a bell? What does verse 9 say? According to all that I show thee after the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it. Then at the end of the chapter, verse 40, look that thou make them after their pattern. Hebrew word is tavnit, T-A-V-N-I-T. Brown Driver Briggs, which is BDB, construction, pattern, figure. Now the Greek word here shows up in our New Testament. I'm going to give you Acts 7:44. You remember that Stephen was given a historical lesson to the leadership. He said, our fathers had the tabernacle of testimony in the wilderness, just as he who spoke to Moses directed him to make it according to the pattern. It's the same Greek word as found in Acts 7:44. In Exodus 25:40 and in Hebrews 8:5, which we'll explore in part 3.2. All right, so the pattern from the Septuagint, that's the LXX, Exodus 25:9. There's your word. From the Greek English lexicon of the Septuagint, model, plan, pattern is how they define it. BDAG, same. In Little and Scott, a pattern or a model of the thing to be executed. So far we have make a copy of the original, which you get from Exodus 25:8 and 9. Very clear. Other passages that follow this theme using the Hebrew word T-A-V-N-I-T. This is good. 1 Chronicles 28:11 through 19. What is happening here? Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, houses, treasuries, upper chambers, inner parlors, and of the place of the mercy seat. 12. And the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit of the courts of the house, all the chambers, the treasuries of the house, the treasuries of the dedicated things. 13. The courses of the priests and the Levites, all the work of the service of the house, for all the vessels of the service in the house. 18, for the altar of incense, refined gold by weight, gold for the pattern of the chariot, of the cherubims that spread out their wings and covered the ark. 19, all this, said David, Yahweh made me understand in writing by his hand upon me, even all the works of this pattern. So we got some research to do, and we shall do it in 3.2. The pattern, Exodus 43:10, the millennial kingdom temple. Thou son of man, show the house to the house of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. That's what the text says. This next quote is from Measure the Pattern, Volume 1 by Joseph Good. I've passed that book around here in the assembly. Page 1. The command to measure the pattern of the temple at first glance seems to be instruction to study the architecture and layout of the structures. In reality, it is direction in how to study the temple to arrive at the truth of what the temple was about. This is from his book, Measure the Pattern. Here is the book. So, where might he be getting this from? Stay tuned. 3.2 at our next meeting. We will explore all of these words in Hebrew, Greek, and English across the entire scriptures so you can begin to see what is happening with the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificial system. Thank you. That is the end of this presentation. And now I will take questions.